Squint.
This video is sponsored by Squarespace, the Antoine Dupont of website builders. A phrase I realise now I think about it, I've never really explained. Because whilst Antoine is the finest Scrum Half in the world, much as Squarespace is the finest website builder, you will find if you search the internet for 1 billion hours, in the same way, Squarespace has every tool available. Dupont can kick off both feet, he can pull in, he can throw into the line out, he can do whatever. Squarespace allows you to build the website from scratch. Add social features, add video platforms, add blogging features, add a storefront, add items, add the entire thing being integrated in one place. The entire website experience boiled down to one location. And if you fancy getting a little bit of money off this very lovely, very shiny website, you can head to the link in the description, use the offer code SQUIDGERUGBY to save yourself some money on this Antoine Dupont of a website that I know you personally are going to build.
Squint.
8 years ago this week, I made a video about rugby. I finished it, I uploaded it, I posted it on the Rugby Union subreddit, and I sent it to Paul Williams, the rugby journalist, the excellent rugby journalist, and Lee Calvert from the Blood and Mud podcast and blog at the time, who had written a few bits for their blog. I put it on the internet, and I ran to the closest cinema and just saw whatever the next film on was. And 2 hours of Winston Churchill biopic later, I came out the other side. I had a look. I'd been making stuff and posting it on the internet since I was about 7 or 8 years old. And already in those few hours, this was the most anyone had ever watched anything I'd ever made. It had gone down really well. People liked the video. People liked what I'd done. People were asking if I was going to do another one. I instantly made a start on it. My second video on Scotland did well. People liked it. People still quote it to me sometimes. And then a few weeks later, I made the third video on Conor Murray. And that absolutely blew up. It is still one of the best performing videos on the channel. It did absurdly well. It was just shared in, I think, lots of Facebook groups and WhatsApp groups and so on at the time. And it led to the whole thing taking off. And in the space of about a month and a half, I had gone from incredibly depressed young nothing, living in a flat, working a kind of, minimum wage job in a flat literally smaller than the corner of the studio you can see now, like the size of a Weetabix box, to suddenly I had this thing that was going incredibly, incredibly well. It's been an amazing and incredibly surreal few years. I can't quite begin to put a list on all the things I've done. I quit my job and started working full-time, doing that, a year or so on from there, early 2019. And from there, haven't really looked back. I went to Japan in 2019 for the World Cup, so I've been saving up for since the moment I turned 18. And I went on my own to Japan for 6 weeks, so I couldn't speak the language. And yet I never had a moment where I was lonely or lost. Like, I just kept running into people who knew me through the channel, who were excited to talk about rugby for a little bit. And it was amazing, the kind of community that I felt was building, and the way things spun and ran away from themselves, and the amount of things I've done, the people I've met, the places I've been. I got to walk down the tunnel on a match day in the Principality Stadium. Like, it was Judgment Day, and I watched the Ospreys get battered shortly afterwards, but all the same, it was a cool experience. It's been a really amazing and surreal, quite long number of years, long enough that the surrealism has sunk back in, and I have to kind of force it back up to the surface and make myself feel it and realize how lucky I've been over the last few years. Now, for a lot of people have asked down those 8 years what the process of making a video is. And I think it's quite clear to a lot of people. A lot goes into it, and I've always thought you kind of leave it at that. Leave it at a lot of work goes in, and some magical rugby content fairy kind of drops it into your inbox, and that's fine. I think that's what most people want to hear. But I think it's probably worth going a little bit over what the process actually is. And it is incredibly labor intensive. So this was the way that built up over a number of years. Essentially, I will do all the research first, right? And for the first few years, it was purely me doing this entire process on my own, no support, no help whatsoever. First thing is, I do all the research. If this is a match report, that would mean normally watching the game 2 or 3 times back, normally 3, potentially even 4 or 5, and just working out any themes, any patterns, looking over the game again, looking at it from particular points of view? Can you only focus on the defence this time? Can you only focus on one team or the other this time? And then slowly building that up. If it's more of a deep dive, one of the kind of bigger topic videos in between international periods, we do. Those would generally be a case of I would go away, I would research a lot. Sometimes that would involve watching 10, 20, 30, 50 matches even, and getting as much tape as possible, looking at them, going over those games a number of times, trying to pull out any themes I'm seeing, any things that are emerging. Sometimes, like, you know, there was a deep dive we did on the Bright Miracle a few years ago. For that, I read, I think, 5 books. I read both Eddie Jones' autobiographies. I read another book on the history of Japanese rugby, and I read 2 of the books Eddie Jones cited as inspiration, as things that he looked at when putting that team together. In order to get as detailed a look as possible, I'll often end up doing that, of doing a lot of research, listening to podcasts, reading books rather, doing all of this. I put all that together. That can take any amount of time, but as an estimate, maybe... Then I would go ahead and write the script. Now, this is normally a time-consuming process, but this is the thing I love. This is the thing I've always done. This is my background. So this, I think the quickest I've ever done is probably about 4 hours total, though it's not always just sitting down in one block. It's often getting up, you know, doing some one day, some the next. Generally, it's more than that, though. Sometimes it takes way, way longer. Sometimes it takes an entire week to put something together. But generally, let's say... So... You then come into the next stage. I will write, rewrite, redraft, reread the whole process. You chuck a few more hours on for that. You then get into the process of recording. I'll record a voiceover first. I'll sit down, I'll read the whole thing through out loud to a microphone, much as I'm doing right now, and then go through it and comb out, and this has been Will's job the last few years, any times where I mess up, any times where I pause, any times I say the wrong thing, any times where I breathe, frankly, to try and keep the pace up, try and keep it moving as much as possible. So that'll come out. Those will come out. That'll come down. That's a few more hours on. And then sit down and actually edit the video. And this involves taking that audio track and dropping the appropriate clips, which has been written and recorded with these clips in mind, then put them over the top and add in any extra, like, you know, whether it's just little circles or tracking where the player's moving to, or extra, you know, jokes, whatever I put on screen. All of that comes into the edit process. Generally, the rule always was, and I've got slightly faster over the last few years because I've been doing this a long time now, it would take about 1 hour for every minute on screen. So that's an incredibly time-consuming process. Let's say the video is 22 minutes long and we're looking at putting that whole thing together. I'm going full process. If you add all this up, you throw in the odd stop to go and make a cup of tea or, don't know, use the toilet, and it comes to pretty much a full working week, a full 40-hour week. Now, in the old days, outside of Six Nations blocks, when it was just me and I was putting this together, that was okay, because I got into a cycle where essentially I would work myself ragged, I would go incredibly hard on these. Sometimes if it's a bigger project, they can take up to twice as long as this. They can take enormously longer if it's a huge chunky video, I'm going really deep onto something. Every element can blow out and take twice as long. I got into a cycle where from sort of 2018 to somewhere around 2021, 2022, I would work really hard on a number of videos back to back to back. Then every few months, I would really drastically burn out. And I would just be spent and gone and miserable, and I'd lose any and all joy in the act of creation. And I would stop. And I stopped for about a week, maybe 2 weeks, and I'd pause, and then I would go back to my old schedule of being fairly relentless in all of this. This is all without throwing in the other admin and so on that comes on top of everything else and all the other things involved in running a channel and running what is now a small business. It's become an enormous task. And then the 2021 Six Nations happened. And the thing is, right, as I said, I've been making stuff and putting it online for a very long time. Before this, I was doing stand-up, I was doing a lot of live comedy stuff, I was doing all sorts. And this was the best anything had ever gone by a long way. And there was an audience who liked it and responded to it, and I'm so grateful to all of you. And yet, the other side of this, right, is you cover one game from a Six Nations weekend where there are 3 games, and people go, where are the other 2? It's grand, but like it led to me getting into the situation where at the start of the 21 Six Nations, I promised I would cover every single game. And I fell into the most kind of lethal, honestly, one of the most horrible spells of my life. My daily schedule during that period, and again, I was working from home, was I would wake up around 9 a.m. I would go immediately from the bed to the desk, which is about the distance between me and Johan Uge there, maybe a little bit further. But still, you're looking a few feet away to the desk. I would sit there and I would work on the video immediately from the moment I woke up through to around sort of I'd maybe take, short break for lunch, but we're talking like half an hour here. I'd work through to about 6 p.m. where I would then have a 3-hour nap, wake up around 9 p.m. and do the same thing. I'd then get back to it and work through to about 6 a.m. And I did this every day. I was working, no exaggeration, in order to get those 3 videos finished in the weeks where there wasn't a break week. I was working, no exaggeration, upwards of 100-hour weeks. I was working about 110, 120-hour weeks for several weeks in a row. And even in the break weeks, I was doing, way beyond anything. I was doing 2 of them in the first week and then 1 of them in the last week. I was able to take a bit more time over and slow down a little bit, but you still wanted it out by the Tuesday or the Wednesday, so people hadn't forgotten about the game, and it still became incredibly hectic. And I, frankly, burnt out really bad. Before the tournament was even over, I was gone. Like, my laptop broke and gave it up on itself the week before Super Saturday, the week before the final round. And I honestly felt a massive sense of relief more than anything else. I eventually managed to cover 1 of those games on that final weekend, well after the fact, but that was it. And I kind of decided there and then I couldn't do this anymore. I had to change something. So I hired an external office, just initially a very small one, and then I brought on a few months later my brother, Will, who has done an amazing job and initially grew from kind of coming in a few days here and there to pick up some odd jobs to just fully becoming like an equal part of the channel. Has been amazing and has led so much over the last few years and been such a brilliant partner, person to work with. So I can't speak highly enough of that. But the thing is, right, the other side of this coin is the core problem with all of this is that I, at my kind of soul, at kind of like core level, am a workaholic. And I think a lot of people look at being a workaholic because we live in this kind of grind set bullshit, like go, go, go culture as an aspirational thing. People don't take workaholism seriously, and because it gets used. The word gets used in many different ways. But I know in myself, and it's something I've come to terms with over the last few years, is I am a workaholic in the same way that many other people are alcoholics or drug addicts or sex and love addicts. If something bad happens, if I have some bad news, if I have a bad day, if things aren't going well, I hear something that's upset me, my first instinct is to go to the office and throw myself into doing work stuff until 2, 3 a.m., at which point I can go home and just pass out. Like, I have treated work the same way on the office, indeed, the same way an alcoholic sometimes treats the bar. I would go there immediately, I would sink myself into it, and I would disappear. And I would sort of stop being a person whilst I'm working on whatever project it is. And so you may be able to guess the core problem that occurred after I made those 2 changes in late 21, early 22, which is, instead of dividing the same amount of labour between 2 people, we took on 3 times as much labour, and it became so much more demanding. We put out infinitely more videos. We worked even more. I was never giving myself that time off because suddenly I had people depending on me. I had, another wage I had to pay. I had an office rent I had to make enough for. Previously, it was enough that if I didn't put a video out, I didn't make any money that month. That was okay. I could get by with that. That was fine. I could make do. That wasn't so when I had people depending on me. And so that changed entirely, and that changed the mindset, and the whole thing blew up. In the early days, I literally never, and this is like genuinely true, I would never check how a video performed. I'd never check how many views it got. And so that I never made stuff just because I thought it performed well. I never chased kind of algorithm or chased anything else. And slowly but surely, I start to feel myself turn into that and start chasing the kind of YouTube bullshit that everyone else ends up getting sucked into the longer and longer it goes on. Because also, as this process went on, and as I stopped giving myself those weeks off, and I started just being relentless and working still, generally if I did less than 12 hours, I'd consider it a short day. But also, The rugby YouTube landscape has changed enormously over the last few years. It isn't just me and 2 cents anymore. There's so many people doing this kind of thing, and I love to see that. And I'm so excited by the number of people I keep coming across and going, oh, this is really good, actually. But the thing is, right, there's a lot of people doing styles of content that they can get out much quicker. And there's a lot of people who have whole teams, you know, professional put together things that have whole teams, including ex-internationals or, you know, professionals within the field who can put all of this together and get those out much quicker. So if it's taking us about 40 hours to put together a video and we're getting it out as fast as we can to get there by maybe Wednesday or Thursday in the week after the game's taken place, then someone else can have a video out on that in that form by the Sunday now, by the Monday at the latest. And suddenly, that forces us to move faster, because who cares about that game once you've heard X number of takes about it, once you've seen 20 videos on that, you know, 5, 6 videos more likely, on that by the time we get ours out later in the week, right? And especially with more and more pressure on, that led us to trying to move things further and further forward. So instead of spreading out over the week and trying to be sensible and just getting the work done and getting through 2 or 3 videos a week, but with 2 of us, we're able to do that in less hours and whatever else. Instead, we were trying to rush and get videos out on the Monday, if we could, or the Tuesday, get them done, get them turned around, and that led to, personally for me, right, I was normally starting work on videos at halftime during games, working on them all evening after the games are done in like a Six Nations or autumn weekend, generally up late nights, generally pushing through, and trying to cram those 40 hours into 3 or 4 days. And that is unsustainable, and that is, I would go as far as saying, bad. But this became the landscape. This became where things were heading. And the thing is, I don't want to do that anymore. I don't want to do things like this anymore. I have felt over the last few years my workaholism, if not ruin, but certainly negatively affect almost every area of my life, and my life infinitely. And so much of the way we've done things over the last few years has just continued to negatively impact me, my mental health, my ability to kind of motivate myself and keep doing this. All of this I felt kind of wane away over the last few years. I felt myself feel such a sense of dread. Like I would, on Six Nations, for a number of years following that 21 Six Nations that I mentioned, between 2022 and I think last year, 2025 was the first time it didn't happen for quite a long time. In about 2024, I would, every round of every Six Nations game, and almost always in the autumn, the morning before there were games taking place, I would have a panic attack. Like it just came to be a part of my life because I felt myself sliding into and being kind of encompassed by what happened in 21 and how exhausting it was and how much it took out of me and how it basically burnt me out. And instead of recovering from that burnout, what I'd done was build a system so that instead my burnout was longer and slower and just rolled on for what turned out to be the next 5 years. I don't want to work like this anymore. Frankly, I haven't wanted to work like this for quite a long time, if I'm honest with myself. I've basically been burnt out for the last 4 years continuously, with the odd spark of occasionally feeling excitement in making videos again. And I don't want to do that anymore. I don't want to put up with that anymore. And I don't think it's good for me, nor people around me, quite frankly. So, here's what's going to happen. This is not the end of the channel, but there are going to be some changes. For one, I'm going to take a bit of a backward seat. Will's going to take more on. But also, beyond that, we are going to change what we're putting out, how much we're going to put out, and move away from the kind of quantity focus, right? Rather than trying to get a video out every single week and hitting goals and ticking off every game and so on, I want to move back to what the channel was when I started this, which is videos about rugby that excite me. If I spotted a theme, if I had an idea, if I saw something, if there's a player that was really getting me going, make a video on it, talk about it. Things that made me excited to go through that 40-hour process, to sit down and go, yeah, this is cool, this is exciting, there's something here. I want to get back to that. I want to get back to doing that. Alongside this, we are going to have our second channel running with our little studio setup, which will keep pumping out more and more videos because they are, frankly, much easier to produce. And we can continue putting them out, continue kind of feeding that side of the algorithm, doing that in a much easier way, a much more sustainable way than the way we had been doing, because it had just become a bit of a nightmare. All of that is over on More Squid Rugby. Please go and have a look at that if you've enjoyed the channel in the past. A lot of that will carry over there. In international periods, we're going to move that format in these studio seats over to the main channel, right? And we're going to do what we did in the autumn. So in the autumn, because the other side of this all is there's a massive change in the copyright situation. And nothing has changed other than our culture and society. And I think over the last few years, we've kind of seen big corporations win. None of them give a shit about being cool anymore. None of them care about people complaining if it affects their bottom line. They don't mind, right? So all of this has shifted. If it doesn't lead to them making more money, they aren't doing the thing that's popular. And so giving the footage rights to us, turning a blind eye as they had, having informal agreements as I had with the Six Nations before this, none of that is taking place. So the Six Nations threatened legal action. We continue using footage during tournament windows. So we're okay outside of them. That's a whole thing we've handled elsewhere. But during tournament windows, we aren't allowed to use footage. So we're going to do what we did in the autumn, which is big deep dives and still try and cover in as much detail, but from the studio setup. Move that over. And the thing is, right, with those, we do the same amount of research. We look over the game in the same detail. We put as much time into analysing and going over the game. Just we deliver it in a much easier to edit fashion, right? Once that research portion is done, and once we have all of our notes together, and we have any themes that have emerged over the game all together and written down, we will sit down in these two chairs and we will talk about the game. Generally that recording will take about 45 minutes, and then we'll edit it, and that will take 2 or 3 hours instead of 40. And the whole process comes down to something we can turn around in a day, and yet still have, hopefully, the same level of analysis, quality, etc. in there. And that will allow, all being well, us to make a handful outside of the rest of the year of high quality videos in the usual video essay format, and keep to that and continue doing that over the rest of the year, over the rest of the 12 months, outside those international periods, where we will lean into the studio setup and that idea over the year. This is a plan I've thought about a lot. I've wanted to kind of try and put into action way back, so up 2022, 23. Because the other side of this is, right, I've got other things I want to do. You know, I've got other projects I want to be involved in. I've got a number of things that have fallen through over the last few years because I couldn't commit the time because I was so busy with the channel or with other things that's channel adjacent. I've got other goals and other dreams. I've always wanted to, I've always felt weird about admitting it on camera, but like my goal was always to make movies, to, you know, make films. And like that's been the goal, and that's something I want to try and like take some steps towards, try and get a short made, make some stuff over the next year. And that's something I'm excited by. And I want to make sure the channel remains something I'm really excited by, because it has been the absolute honor and the absolute just like a dream, all this to have happened over the last year. And I'm very sorry if it ever showed in the content that I was struggling. But thank you so much to everyone for watching, for sitting through not just this video, because I appreciate this might have felt a bit self-indulgent, but thank you for this, but thank you for the last 8 years. Hopefully, there's a few more years to come, and I hope as many of you as possible will join us on this journey, and whatever it ends up being as we go. A huge thank you to everyone in addition that supported the channel on Patreon over the last few years. It has been absolutely enormous for just like keeping this going, keeping this running, because as I said, like the process is incredibly labor intensive. And there's been points over the last few years since we started doing the studio stuff where I've just realized like, oh, it is so much easier to just shit out content, right? And yet we've continued to try and keep the bar as high as possible. And it's only, you know, your contributions that have like allowed that to be in any way financially sustainable. So thank you to all of you especially, but thank you to everyone that's been along for the long haul, everyone that's been involved and watching the channel for whether it's 8 years, whether it's 5 years, whether you came on board in the autumn or even just over the last few weeks. Thank you so much. I can't begin to express how much it's meant. You've all given me so like properly very much. And I suppose it's time that God, it's hard to even say. Like, I had like a, you know, like an emotional line written, but it's hard to say. It's probably time you've all done so much for me. It's time I try and do something myself, was where that line was going, but it's quite hard to deliver earnestly whilst looking down a camera. Maybe I just leave this version. Maybe I just leave this version in. Okay. Right. YouTube. Yeah. Rugby, more rugby. That's how I end videos. That's how I do it. Please stay tuned for more rugby. It's terrible. No, let's do that again.